Hi everyone, and welcome to your audio recorded lecture on types of writing and writing fundamentals. This week's learning outcomes include defining scholarly writing, identifying the relevance of scholarly writing to nursing, identifying the writing expectations of the Bridge BSCN program, distinguishing between different writing types, and developing skills associated with each type of writing. You will often be required to use a combination of types of writing within one assignment. Early on in your academic journey, you may be asked to simply describe or summarize a text, or construct an annotated bibliography, like you're going to do in this particular course. You might be asked to do some simple evaluation, critique, analysis of a text perhaps. Throughout your program, you will constantly be required to engage in reflective writing. As you progress in your program, you will be asked to engage in more challenging forms of writing, including advanced synthesis and critique. You will often be required to use a combination of types of writing within one assignment. For example, reflective writing will require you to reflect, sometimes analyze as well. The table on this slide provides you with a brief description of common types of writing. Take time to watch the audio podcast available to you in Chapter 4 this week. It is about 6 minutes long and identifies the types of writing. When we look at descriptive writing, this is used when you are describing or summarizing something that you've read. It does not include your personal opinion or a critique of what you read. It is simply just a summary of what the author has said in your own words. Keep in mind that when completing descriptive writing, you need to use complete sentences. You will write a summary in a neutral voice and avoid incorporating your opinion or critique of the text in any way. You will paraphrase the text instead in your own words, avoiding completely the use of direct quotations. Instead, you will cite the paraphrased information. The length of the summary would vary depending on the reason for completing it and the audience. Generally, a summary can range from a few sentences to a couple of pages. When we look at reflective writing, have you ever been asked to reflect on an experience in the clinical setting? I'm sure while working towards being an RPN, you took part in reflective practice and learned that process. In fact, reflective writing is a part of the College of Nurses of Ontario Quality Assurance Program. So it's something we do every year, and we are encouraged to partake in throughout the year. It is used in the healthcare profession and allows us to critically think, deeply understand, and include a deep analysis of ourselves. We're recalling an experience, we're thinking about it, we're considering it, and then we're writing about it. If possible, when we're completing reflective writing, we want to choose a topic or a specific situation that was meaningful to us. It's a time for you to be vulnerable in your writing, share your thoughts, your feelings. You don't need to write about a sanitized version of yourself. It's okay to ponder mistakes you may have made or areas for improvement that are needed for future. The description portion is really important. But so is the analysis, because these areas allow you to gain new insights into your practice. Thinking critically about your experience and being open to new perspectives is a part of reflective writing. And remember, this will allow you as a nurse to identify your strengths, identify your areas for improvement, with an overall aim at strengthening your practice and building your practice. The steps here are included in this slide, and I would strongly encourage you to take a look at the practice reflective essay that's included as a URL here. It will be very useful moving forward. When we talk about reflective writing, we are often encouraged to use the LEARN format. Look back, elaborate, analyze, revise, new trial. The College of Nurses of Ontario also encourages us to use that LEARN format and has many examples and suggestions on their website when you start thinking further about reflective writing. Analytical writing. This is generally devoid of overt opinion. Instead, opinion is conveyed in terms of what and how information is presented. A common error that beginners make is to be persuaded by one viewpoint without a good understanding of the full picture. You need to keep an open mind and consider differing points of view while reading about a particular topic. You need to avoid over-quoting one source. Novice writers often privilege one source over others. While you may cite classic literature, the art of analysis is being able to weave together several sources of information. Try to set aside your values, at least initially. You might find that your values play a role in establishing your perspective or point of view. Instead, when you look at analytical writing, start by learning the facts. This will ensure that your values will be well informed. Don't fall trap to reductionism. For the sake of clarity, it is tempting to write in a way that simplifies an issue or topic, but this can mislead the writer. Balance is key. While it is good to be concise, you also need to allow for complexity. Persuasive writing. This is where you want to make sure your viewpoint is apparent. Your point of view should be clearly expressed in a topic sentence at the beginning of each paragraph. This should contain the main idea of the paragraph and relate back to your overall argument. You need to really stay focused with this type of writing on your main point. Even if some facts challenge your argument, it is important to address them rather than be defeated or lured by them. Rarely is there a singular thread that will unravel your belief system. It is important that you maintain a consistent argument throughout this type of paper. Avoid confounding persuasion or righteousness. This means avoiding value-based language like good and evil, as this risks evoking emotions that could cloud critical thought. Focus on your overall ideas instead of individuals. Generally, when making an argument, you are questioning an idea or belief. Stay focused on that idea instead of pointing fingers at certain people. Write in a style and a tone that is appropriate for your subject and audience. Tailor your language to both, while still being true to your own voice. You should use some key transitional words in persuasive writing, including things like most importantly, almost as importantly, just as importantly, and finally. Some writers may claim that one piece of evidence or another proves the argument, but proving an argument is often not possible. No evidence proves a debatable topic one way or another. That is why the topic is debatable. Facts can be provoked, opinions can be supported, explained, and persuaded, but proof cannot happen. Critical writing depends on your ability to think critically. Your writing will often involve reflection on written texts. That is critical reading. Your critical reading of a text and thinking about a text enables you to use it to make your own arguments. As a critical thinker and a writer, you will make judgments and interpretations of these ideas, arguments, and claims of others presented in the text you have read. The key is, don't read looking only or primarily for information. Instead, read to determine ways of thinking about that subject. Non-critical reading is focused on learning the information provided by a source. In this mode, you focus on understanding the information, ideas, and opinions stated within the text. Sometimes non-critical reading is a part of our day-to-day lives. For example, we consult a weather report to help us to decide whether or not we will pack an umbrella when we leave the house. Is it snowing out today? Is it going to be cold? Perhaps I should wear a sweater. Often, we don't need to be critical readers to get the information we need about the weather. However, if the weather report says that it will be a sunny, cloudless day, and we can see that it is pouring rain when we look outside, we will likely bring our critical reading abilities back into play. Critical writing. While summarizing an issue, it is important to adopt the language used in the original source, rather than imposing new words, beliefs, or assumptions. Clearly and concisely argue one point at a time. An outline will help you keep on track, as each paragraph should focus on a main point. Highlight strengths, limitations, and recommendations in a respectful manner. Severe language often can make the reader question your credibility. It is also more helpful to provide constructive feedback rather than stressing the futility of an approach. See Table 4.3 for examples of ways to avoid severe language. That table is also shown here on your slide. Steps to writing critically. There are 4 steps to writing critically that are noted on this slide. It's important to pay close attention to them and review them in detail, not only on this slide, but also in this week's reading. Editorial writing. This is where we write using a professional tone. Think about how you can present your idea constructively without suggesting a cure-all. Choose clear and simple language and avoid jargon and slang. Don't make your reader work to understand what you're talking about. Create a short title that emphasizes your main point, that is catchy and provoking. Do your research. Make sure your facts are correct. It's important that you can support your argument and use examples to explain your thoughts. Keep it concise. The length will depend on the publication that you're writing for, but editorials usually range from 500 to 1,500 words. But if you're writing as a part of a course's evaluation component, you really need to refer to the assignment guidelines. A literature review. This one's an important one because it's something you're going to be doing in this course. An annotated bibliography. It's concise. It typically is presented as one paragraph ranging from 100 to 300 words, but expectations do vary, so you need to make sure you check the assignment guidelines or ask your professor. Narrative literature reviews will take much longer and vary in length dependent on the reason for writing it. If it's part of a larger assignment, your instructor may provide you a specific length. If it's part of an article publishing results from a study, it may serve as a background section and be fairly short, like a few paragraphs. If it's part of a graduate thesis, it may form one of your chapters and may be many pages long. Either way, when we look at each, let's look at annotated bibliography in the steps. Identify your topic and the number of texts or resources to be included. From there, search the literature, making sure that you're searching appropriate literature that's up to date within the last 5 years. Take notes while reading and critiquing what you're reading. Construct a short annotation for each text, briefly commenting on the text and including a bibliographic citation. There are many examples of this that can be found out there. For example, look at some of the advice from U of T. It will be useful to you when you're starting to write your own annotated bibliography for this course. Now, check out How to Write an Annotated Bibliography APA Style 7th edition. This will also be really important when you're starting to work on your annotated bibliography for the second part of your assignment in this course. Overall, the fundamentals of writing. What does the audience already know about my topic? Can I use simple or complex terms? Can I use jargon? To what degree should I provide definitions of terms? Can I assume a political stance? What will compel the audience? Will personal accounts, case studies, or statistics be more influential to persuade them? What ideological assumptions should I use? For example, does the audience support the topic? Or am I presenting a radical idea? How do I want the audience to feel after reading my work? For example, what emotions will you evoke in your writing? A desire for change, perhaps? Or do you want them to just consider an issue carefully? Always consider the reader and the audience. Writing purpose. Always identify your purpose before you start your writing. How will I figure out the purpose of my paper? How will I create my purpose statement? When writing a purpose statement, you need to consider your audience. Write your purpose clearly, concisely, and in present tense. As you do this, you really need to make sure you choose your verbs purposefully and limit the number of verbs you use. Every paper you write should have a purpose and an overview, and each paragraph should serve your main purpose. Your main purpose and your overview is presented in your introduction. Point of view and pronouns. Papers can be written in first person, second person, or third person. It depends on the type of assignment that you're completing as to if you're using first, second, or third person. So it's important to make sure that you read the assignment instructions carefully and clarify with your professor if you're not sure about which point of view and which pronouns to use. The tone of the writing will identify a writer's attitude towards a topic, whether it's informal, conversational, professional, scientific, ironic, critical, rhetorical, or political. The tone in which we write tells us what our attitude is. Sentence and paragraph construction. Plan, plan, plan. Plan the paper. Plan the level 1 headings, which we talked about in week 1. Plan your paragraphs and create an outline. Each paragraph should convey one main point, usually identified in the first sentence, which will then be further highlighted as you continue. Although there are exceptions, here are some guiding principles. Sentences should be no longer than 3 lines. If it's longer than 3 lines, it's more of a run-on sentence, and maybe you want to break that up a little bit. Paragraphs should be at minimum 3 to 8 sentences. 1 or 2 sentences is not a paragraph. In a double-spaced paper, paragraphs, when you look at them, should be about half to 3/4 of a page. Clear and complex language. You want to avoid broad and general terms. Hospitals, governments, patients. You want to be more specific. Commonly misused words. Things like, as mentioned, several people. This proves, this correlates with. Colloquial language makes characters and stories more interesting, and if their background is similar to yours, more relatable. Colloquial language helps you as a writer build familiarity and trust with your readers. Most dictionaries define colloquialisms as words or phrases that are neither formal nor literary, meaning they are informal, unfancy, everyday type language that we might see. Typically, when discussing colloquialism, we're talking about language specific to a designated country or region. It's the language most often used in informal situations between ordinary people. In other words, it's how people talk in conversation. So as a literary device, it helps make your dialogue sound more realistic. Now that we know what we're talking about, let's deal with 2 things that often get mixed up with colloquialisms: slang and jargon. Slang includes unique words, expressions, often cliches, spoken in specific social groups, like teenagers, while colloquialisms are usually spoken by everyone in a particular geographical region. For example, a teenager might use a slang word like swag or super sick to describe something that meets their approval, while older age groups in the same region typically won't. But a teenager is just as likely to use the phrase pop instead of cola, or biscuit instead of cookie, if the people in their region do the same. Jargon is mostly technical terms used by people in a particular profession. People outside of those professions typically won't know those words in everyday speech. A doctor might use words like idiopathic in a sentence with peers or even patients, but most non-medical people will only use those types of terms when quoting a medical professional. Yet, a doctor is just as likely to refer to a diaper as a nappy, if that's the colloquial word for it where he or she lives. Even those who agree that slang words and jargon are generally distinct from colloquialisms, it is possible for words and phrases that start as slang or jargon to become a part of a region's colloquial vocabulary. Colloquial words: wicked, for very or really. Contractions like ain't, I ain't gonna do it, I'm gonna call y'all later. Profanity that's specific to a country or region. The word bloody is a profanity in the UK, but just an adjective in the US. Some colloquial phrases. That was hard to swallow. Really meaning, that was really difficult to believe. Or, that patient's going to kick the bucket. Or, die. Wow, she just stirred up the hornet's nest. Meaning provoking a strong negative reaction. So always be considerate. Always consider using clear, yet complex language. Respectful and inclusive language. Labels are words that categorize people in reductive ways. They can overpower or demean them. We really need to pay attention to this. For example, talking about the demented patient, the autistic child, or that psych patient in room 3. These types of sayings, they're not respectful, they're not inclusive, so just be very careful and cognizant of the words, the terms, and the phrases that we use, not only even in just our writing, but also in our everyday speech. Other key points, commonly confused words, you want to avoid those. You want to make sure that you consider grammar and style tips. These sections in your reading might be a bit repetitive from your previous education, but still important to review them because they do highlight some common errors that can help you moving forward as you're writing your papers throughout your program. So thank you for listening today. Coming up next in BRN 102, week 2 and 3 are combined. In week 4, we focus on reading comprehension and assumptions. Your first assignment is due in week 4, the discussion post. And we will also spend a lot of time in week 3 particular when we're back synchronously together on the research paper, and I will give some time for that in class. Thank you so much and have a great day.